Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Lorna Titley. We at Keynote Communications, together with the host of today's webinar, Cookson Adventures, are delighted to welcome you all. Today we'll be looking at new remote super yacht destinations. And after you've heard from our expert speakers at Cookson Adventures, there will be time for you to put your questions to them. Just to let you know, this is an interactive session, so if you would like to pose a question in person on the screen, then please type the word live after your question. We will then, when the time comes, move you onto the screen so that you can ask your question directly on the screen to our speakers. All questions, whether you want to be live or whether you just want to stay in the audience, should go in the Q&A box, please, not in the chat facility. So I would now like to introduce Henry Cookson, founder and chairman of Cookson Adventures. Henry set up Cookson Adventures in 2009, and since then the company has designed world first yachting expeditions that have helped scientists identify a new type of killer whale, organized the first private submersible dive in Antarctica, and launched multi-yacht conservation projects in the Galapagos Islands. Henry is joined by Neal Bateman, head of yachting projects at Cookson Adventures. Neal has spent many summers growing up exploring the bush in his homeland, South Africa, and this instilled in him a deep appreciation for the great outdoors and wildlife, which has since seen him visit 47 countries, a number that keeps on growing. Full biographies for both Henry and Neal can be seen at our website, www.keynote.com. But in the meantime, over to you, Henry and Neal. Thank you.
Thank you for your kind introduction there, Lorna. Just get the presentation up. So before we have a handful of destinations that we want to share with the yachting community, some which will be a little bit familiar, some probably not so familiar. But I think you know, the world, especially since COVID, has become, people have taken pause and are thinking of more unique and different things to go beyond the usual sort of chartering and owners itineraries. And this is something that we want to share with you. So just before we sort of delve into the actual destinations themselves, a little bit about who we are at Cookson Adventures and what we are about. Myself, Henry Cookson, I've been traveling the planet for many decades and established Cookson Adventures in 2009, having already spent several years as a polar and high altitude trekking guide and safari guide in Africa. And since 2009, we've assembled a team. We're now 18 individuals, all bringing a wealth of different knowledge to the pot. And we do expeditions, conservation type trips, family events around the world, family sabbaticals, all sorts of different types of experience, whether it's land, sea or air. But yachts is something which is very central to what we do. And I think the expertise we bring from the myriad of different people who work in our team allows us to sort of give a different perspective on how to use your yacht as a platform and to really uncover and make the most out of destinations, even destinations which people would say are relatively well tread and known. It's about how can you sometimes rethink things and do things which work better for what your clients' priorities and wants are. Well, I've spoken briefly about myself. As I said, I've worked as a safari guide in Africa, riding safaris, most in East Africa, but have traveled the continent extensively, and have been doing sort of yachting projects since 2010, whether it's been Galapagos, Antarctica, Baja, Solomon Islands, Mediterranean. We tend to specialize in the more remote and exotic, and quite often sort of very complicated projects with multi-vessels, with helicopters, with submersibles, and numerous moving parts. The team that we have with us, I'll quickly go through them. So we have Nick, who's our director of sales, Neal, who's also on the call, who has had a career in yachting and also as a guide himself and running around the African bush. Tom, who's our military guy, who has spent many years in the military and been with us for over 5 years. And then Will, who on the yachting side of things helps us deliver some of our more specialist submersible projects, including the management of a submersible that we run for a client all around the world. And as we're sort of talking about submersible, I've just come back from Malta, where I was diving using a sort of Triton, 3-man Triton in the Maltese waters only yesterday. So back in London and into reality again. One of the central things which is core to what we've always been doing, and now conservation is sort of the buzzword in terms of everything that's done related to travel or yachting or any sort of high level travel, which is what we're talking about when we're dealing with yachts, is conservation. We've been working with conservationists, with researchers, with scientists since the outset, and it's something which is very, very core to our values, and not just putting the greenwash on something. It's actually sort of doing genuine, meaningful projects and research, which we support via our clients' donations, but also at the same time trying to open the eyes of these very people that we look after to help give them a better understanding of the world and the challenges that we face. And the reality is that, you know, if we do want to continue experiencing these amazing things on our planet, that we actually do need to start, you know, looking at how we operate on our day-to-day lives, how we run our companies, and obviously the type of people who are in the owning and chartering of yachts have a bigger, more significant part to play, given the leverages of their positions. In the yacht side of things, as I said, we do a lot of land-based stuff. Is the voyage planning. I think many of you, being an industry-specific seminar here, are quite familiar with that. But Neal's just going to quickly sort of run through, you know, some of the basic elements, just sort of, I suppose, set the scene before we start delving into the actual destinations themselves.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So yeah, as I'm sure you know, voyage planning is always central to any sort of yacht journey. No more so than when you're visiting these remote and exciting destinations. And it's also a very exciting part of the planning process. It's very sort of interactive with the captains and crew and also the owners. So you end up having weekly or bi-weekly talks with the owner and the crew sort of as you build out this trip. And it involves a lot of sort of pre-planning, but once you've covered those hurdles, the process is very smooth. We work with an extensive network of professionals, whether they're locals, ice pilots, marine experts, and also lean on our in-house team of researchers and project managers to put this all together. Central to this is sort of making sure there's enough contingency within the voyage plan to make sure that we hit the locations at the best season, the best time of year, and with all the assets in place. So we will advise the crew on which equipment they need on board, which resources to have, and also provide any training for them. So if you're visiting the polar region, you have to do some polar training, make sure the vessel's polar coded, and build all of these things into the itinerary. And also central to that is identifying any pinch points. So if you need to have specialist equipment on board, you need to make sure you're getting it on board at the right time. That's both economical and feasible. So if it's a submarine that needs to be loaded on board, you're paying a charter rate on that if it's not owned by the yacht. So you need to make sure you're getting it on the vessel at the right time and in the most ideal location. Anyway, as Henry said, I won't labor on this point too much. There's some exciting destinations to talk about, so we'll move forward to those.
Thank you, Neal. Not sure we'll ever get used to this Zoom thing. Let's hope it's not a reality for too many months more. So the first destination we're going to talk about is one of my particular favorites. Having done a few projects here, actually, it was only there this August for a trip. We were just doing some shark research, actually tagging hammerheads, scalloped hammerheads, and silver reef sharks and Galapagos sharks to help further understanding of not just shark behavior in and around Cocos Island, but actually in the wider region. Cocos Island is essentially a rock in the middle of the Pacific, about 300 nautical miles off the coast of Costa Rica. It's probably been made popular by being the opening shot of Jurassic Park, and it really is a magnificent sight to behold. It has it's covered in lush jungle. It has waterfalls sort of pouring off the cliffs on the side, crashing onto the beach below. And it really is sort of a truly isolated and well-preserved island that the Costa Rican government have protected for a number of years now. There is actually a permanent ranger station on there to not only ensure people aren't coming ashore without the right permits, but also to actually monitor and patrol the marine protected area around it. The island itself is fascinating, but it can only be used for sort of a small element of a trip. This sort of destination is really for those purists who are into their diving and delving into the marine world. There are ways, again, not everyone is a specialist diver. The diving conditions here are challenging. There are strong currents, and it's probably, in terms of temperatures, you're looking at something which is not quite as comfortable as, say, what you experience in the Bahamas. So it's not for beginners, and certainly a degree of expertise is needed. Saying that, you have a platform, a vessel, and it can have 12, if not more, guests, depending on its registry, and if it's a private trip or a commercial trip. Not everyone might be interested in diving, and so there is a potential here to bring in submersibles. Permits can be achieved, which allows people, even those who are experienced divers, to see the underwater realm from a different viewpoint as well. And again, these images that are on the screen are from my trip back in August. We're actually operating on a Galapagos shark there. That's one of our veterinary researchers there, actually implanting satellite receivers so they can help understand their movements. The bigger picture being establishing marine corridors between the various sort of outposts that you have through the tropical Pacific, being Galapagos, Socorro, Malpelo, and Cocos. At the moment, these places are only protected sort of around their locality, but these species of shark and other organisms are actually migrating between them, and the longliners are taking their toll on them. So here is an idea that hopefully will fund that research. In terms of getting there, as I said, it's a remote island. It does not have an airstrip or anything, so you are going to have to cruise from the mainland, and typically, depending on the speed of your vessel, you're looking at about an 18-hour transfer window. So it's, even for the time constrained, the barriers to entry aren't too offensive in terms of some of the more remote, sort of sharky, amazing world-class destinations that you do get round the planet. It's moving on. We're sort of pivoting over here to somewhere. So Cocos is relatively well known to a somewhat lesser known place called Aldabra down in the Indian Ocean, located near to the Seychelles and north of Madagascar. This as a destination is very infrequently visited. One of the complexities here is the permitting issue, which is possible with time and prior planning. And here, unlike Cocos, it's brought a little bit more alive in terms of what you can do on the land. So in terms of a specialist destination, that there is more sort of diversity. You have giant tortoises, you have sea turtles nesting, you have thousands of frigate birds. I think there's a colony of 10,000 frigate birds, numerous species of plants. You have coconut crabs, which you may have seen on some of the sort of David Attenborough Planet Earth type things, which are sort of the size of a sort of a dinner plate. So you don't need to rely on a group here who purely want to dive in the underwater realm. And the conditions here, again, a lot more favorable, not so challenging as you would find, say, in a destination like Cocos. In terms of the times of year, you're looking between April and September is your sort of your sweet spots. Access is either from cruising down from the Seychelles, or there is an airstrip on one of the smaller atolls that could be brought in, and as a very short cruise to actually access the destination. And there you can see some of the diversity you have. I mean, it truly is, you know, in terms of those who've already had an experience in various the more usual destinations where it's the Caribbean. This is definitely sort of takes it up another peg, and sort of an interesting option for yachts which are sort of doing that sort of eastern cruise sort of through the Red Sea and then the Maldives. It sort of gives that sort of a little bit more excitement to your usual destination that you would find down there. So moving on to Socotra. So we're still looking in the Indian Ocean here. Socotra, I suppose, is a bit more of an infamous destination. It's one of those sort of jewels out there that has been kept intact for a long time, sadly, because of the issue of piracy. It's an island which is sovereign to the Yemen, but because of the activity of Somali pirates for the last sort of decade or so, it's been very much off the map. However, the situation in the previous few years has changed significantly. There is now actually a United Arab Emirates garrison of military force there, which essentially means that this island now is a viable option for yacht trips. And in fact, we had 2 trips due to go here in the past 18 months, but obviously the complexities of COVID meant that these have been postponed. In terms of what will you do in such a destination, well, it's something which is just unique for those who, again, who are well traveled. It's a land mass which is just full of just treasures. It has incredible cave systems. The sand dunes and the sand structures are sort of almost sort of Disney-like in terms of how beautiful they are. And you head up into the highlands, as you can see on the sort of top left here. You have a lot of species of both plants and animals which are endemic to the island, and these dragon blood trees are sort of quite iconic. And I suppose if you were going to, having traveled the world far and wide, you're going to find something which is sort of unearth-like and sort of more Martian, but with life included. You're looking at somewhere like Socotra as an absolutely amazing destination. The underwater side of it as well, is literally just very rich marine life. You can literally walk off the beach, put on your snorkel, and you'll be surrounded by fish. It really is a magical place. Again, it is a more complicated place to access, but very doable with the right platform and the right permissions, which again is now allowed given the changing in the security situation. And we have also planned land-based trips alone there, but again, the accommodation on an island like this, it literally has been lost in time. Is not something that your typical sort of super yacht client's going to be looking at, hence why using that sort of that bubble of a yacht is a really great way to experience this, you know, previously sort of untapped and inaccessible destination. Next, we're sort of heading back to the Pacific, and as you may recall, talking about Cocos Island, we're talking about establishing these marine corridors with the data from these satellite tagged sharks. And some of the sharks that have previously been tagged have been shown to be going, and some of the manta rays and have been shown to be going to Socorro, or Revillagigedo, which any Mexican will probably tell you you're not pronouncing correctly. The reason why, more popularly by people, it's called Socorro, because it's something that we as Westerners can pronounce. This is an archipelago off the coast of Mexico, and it's sort of similar in some respects to Cocos in terms of just absolutely fantastic marine life. Access to the shore here is extremely limited. There's actually a military base on there, and it's quite a barren landscape. It's a very different sort of feeling to what you'd experience in Cocos. Whereas here there are you know, some world famous dives like Rocas Partidas, where, you know, the underwater sort of topography is in its own right blows you away. And just it's known for some of the largest and more curious, I suppose, manta rays on the planet. And I've been in the water there, literally been surrounded by sort of 40 or 50 3 to 4 meter wingspan mantas. Well known again for its cetaceans, so a lot of whale activity throughout the year. And there are resident dolphins who are very well known, sort of come up to you at 35 meters and sort of play around. Again, it's somewhere which is a relatively more challenging dive spot. You know, there are a degree of currents, and again, the water temperatures is probably a little bit colder than what most people are used to if they've just done their recreational diving in warmer climes. Again, there is a transfer across from the mainland. It's a little bit less than Cocos, that's just over a day. And so, you know, we tend to use that, you know, giving lectures, preparing kit, and, you know, getting familiar with what we're doing. So again, there is that sort of that time need that someone has to devote to it, but again, relatively small compared to the prize that awaits. You know, this really is one of those other meccas for diving that you will find around the world. If we go on now to South Georgia. South Georgia is part of the Antarctic. So usually when people are talking about the Antarctic, and especially by yacht or ship, you're heading down to the Antarctic Peninsula. This is the sort of the landmass that juts out towards South America. And South Georgia is in slightly more northern climes, so still at the bottom of the planet, but you can see in the sort of by the little dot in the circular map we have on our on the slide here. It's a very remote destination, and it is one of those places where just the concentrations of wildlife is just off the scale. You will have to spend 2 to 3 days at sea to get to this destination, so there has to be that commitment, but then the prizes are just something else. I mean, huge colonies of king penguins in the several hundred thousands. If you're going earlier in the season, so sort of October, November, you have these giant elephant seals who will be competing and fighting for mates. and sort of this the pure sort of the overwhelmingness of the senses is something else. The smell, the noise, you know, it really is one of those sort of great experiences of life. For so those who've already had the pleasure and the joy of visiting you know, the Antarctic continent down in the peninsula, this is sort of just takes it up a notch. It's steeped in history, obviously part of Shackleton's great adventure, having been marooned in the Antarctic. And again, there is opportunities to go ashore and do sort of mini expeditions, cross-country skiing, hiking, while, you know, on the other side, you're seeing all this incredible marine activity and huge colonies of wildlife. It is somewhere, like everywhere in the Antarctic, is governed by treaties and special permitting. So there is a permitting process that is needed. And so in terms of, you know, being able to charter or take an owner's vessel down there, you know, several months of notice is needed to put this all into place. And using the Falkland Islands as a sort of a starting point, again, it's a destination which is well worth visiting in its own right. Some of the most incredible seabird life, you know, spectacles also to be witnessed on the planet. And there you see, yeah, some of our elephant seals, humpback whales, king penguins. It's really is just you know, one of nature's great sort of treasures. It sort of almost sort of rivals sort of the Serengeti in Tanzania, and in terms of just this absolute sort of immense amount of wildlife that you'll experience there. And then moving on to the Solomon Islands, this is a destination that's best visited during sort of what we call in our sort of northern climes, sort of our northern summer, so June, July, August. This is some of the best diving on the planet. And again, it's in terms of its level of experience, it's very accessible. Temperatures, currents are manageable for the majority of divers with a small amount of experience. And it also has the sort of, you know, the combination of you know, land-based activities as well. You know, a lot of these destinations sometimes are quite specialist, so the niche side of things means that, you know, you're only going to get a more dive specific group coming along, whereas here, you know, it opens things up a bit more, and allowing you know, families to consider going to such destinations. We have actually previously taken submersibles down here as well, so again, gives another aspect of how to explore these places for those who are either not familiar with diving, or even those who are experienced. You can go to different depths. Again, a very interesting plug-in to a charter, and we've taken families there who want to share, you know, their experience having dived around the world with either their younger children or even their elderly relatives. Huge, you know, sort of options and scope here to integrate with the local cultures. There's wrecks, and, you know, just as you can see from these images, you know, you can spend weeks down here and not have to revisit anything. Obviously, logistically, you know, it's slightly reliant on having, you know, the right platforms in the area. There are some that we work with which are down there or in that region most of the year, and it's somewhere which is becoming increasingly popular, obviously with the caveat of what COVID is allowing us to do or not, but something very much that we have a lot of requests about, and very much enjoy taking people down there. One of the more useful things about it is it's a place which doesn't require permits, so in terms of being able to have it as a sort of a more last minute type destination, that is you know, something which definitely gives it an edge and advantage compared to most of the other destinations we had. The reality being that destinations which are easy to access or distance-wise are not too far and don't need permits, then they by definition tend to be already relatively well visited, and so there needs to be various sort of barriers to entry or ease of entry to make these destinations a little bit more niche, and as we said, the new remote. But for those who have had experience traveling the world and seeing lots of interesting places, these are all very, very good candidates to sort of open their eyes to places a bit beyond where they may have normally looked at. So that's the I suppose the destinations we talked about, and if there are any questions, or Neal, is there anything you want to add in terms of an overall summary of some of those destinations, and then we can go to some questions.
Yeah, I think you've touched on most of the salient points. Just on Solomon Islands, whilst there aren't permitting requirements going in there, you do have to sort of have a relationship with the chiefs. So we go in and we speak with the chiefs, and they will give you permission to use their waters, because the waters of the Solomon Islands are owned by the chiefs. So you'll go in and have the conversations with them. They're very welcoming and friendly. They love to have people visiting, and it is an easy process, but it's just a cultural aspect that we have to take into mind, and we work with them. Often there's a gift, sometimes a donation, depending on the chief, and then they'll allow you to come into their waters, and then they're very open and welcoming. They want you to meet their family when you're there, and it adds another sort of cultural experience to the trip. Yeah, and also just going back to Aldabra, it's called sort of the Galapagos of the Indian Ocean, or the jewel of the Indian Ocean. And I think very much for a good reason. The number of endemic species there, the giant tortoise population is actually larger than the Galapagos. You have 100,000 giant tortoises there, and it's very well protected now. Previously, so some of the atolls and surrounding areas, sort of Assumption Island being one of them, was devastated by guano mining. It's since sort of rebounded, and you have birds returning there, wildlife returning there, and dugongs are also returning to Aldabra. So it's a very unique part of the world, and one that is quite accessible when vessels are in Maldives, Seychelles, or even northern Madagascar. So another great one to keep in mind. I think that's everything from the destination side. Shall we go to questions, Lorna?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, well, thank you very much, Henry and Neal. Thank you, Henry, for that fascinating presentation there. And I think it's probably whetted a lot of appetites for travel after we haven't been able to travel for so long now. We do actually have a couple of questions, but in fact, I have one of my own, if you don't mind indulging me, which is, I know that a lot of what your company does, Henry and Neal, is talking, you're talking about conservation and the importance of including that within your trips. That's really a lot of what it's about. And you mentioned there that you're trying to make your trips carbon neutral. I just wondered how you actually do that. How do you achieve carbon neutrality?
So do you want to deal with this, Neal?
Yeah, I can pick that up. So we work with a partner who helps us identify projects local to particular areas. So the one way of carbon offsetting is you can go and sort of buy carbon credits through a company or on the stock exchange or whatever, but we like to get involved with particular projects. So we'll calculate the carbon burn for the majority of the project. That includes all the guides, flights, the yacht fuel burn, any bringing in of assets and all of those. We'll calculate that. We've got a custom calculator that we use. We'll then go to our partner company, and they will present us with a selection of projects that we can then fund. So we'll chat with the client, or have a look at it internally, and we try and make it as destination specific as possible. So if, for example, we operate a trip in East Africa, there might be a forestation project or installation of solar panels. So we like to fund actual on-the-ground projects that are then used to offset the carbon that was burned for that trip. And also, it's a great way to interact with the client and for them to actually see their money at work, as opposed to just buying carbon offset credits.
Excellent. Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. And I guess kind of following on from that, one of the things that was occurring to me as I was listening to your presentation there, Henry, was that clearly you mentioned that the trips are popular with family groups. But what I'm hearing about more and more is that the next generation of yacht charterers and indeed yacht owners are increasingly looking at new kinds of trips. You know, they're not interested in another cocktail party in the south of France or whatever. They're increasingly looking for these kind of conservation projects and so on. Is the sort of the next gen traveler, is that a big part of your target market for now and indeed for the future? Or how does that work?
Absolutely. You know, you've got a world now where information is everywhere. You know, when I started traveling, and indeed even when formed the company 12 or so years ago, you know, to be able to know where to go, to have an understanding of places beyond the very well traveled, you know, took years of hard work and research and you know, uncovering these places. Now you have a sort of global internet, social media, any secret, so to speak, gets, you know, it's a sort of an arms race, is put out there straight away. So you have a generation now, I suppose, who's just be able to be satisfied. They have so much visual inputs showing them these incredible experiences, whereas, you know, 10, 15 years ago, to know someone who maybe had swum with a whale shark was quite a unique thing. I know when I did some polar expeditions, when I went to the North Pole or across the Antarctic, you know, none of my peer group knew another person who'd done something so foolhardy. Now, you know, everyone knows a few people who've done these things. The world is becoming much more accessible. So you have a generation now that is growing up, seeing these things, knowing that you can go and dive with sharks, you can go and swim with giant manta rays, you can go and you know, camp on the icy glaciers of, you know, the Antarctic Peninsula, and it can be done, you know, safely, and it can be done in a level of comfort that previously was unheard of. So you know, they've grown up in a successful world where they can tick off a lot of the more normal things, and then that appetite, you know, out there, especially with, you know, the huge amount that wealth has been generated by, you know, especially in the IT and Silicon Valley sectors. You know, these people want meaning. They don't just want, you said, they don't want to sit in the sun. They want to come back. They want to experience something. And they want to share that experience with their friends. And so definitely is a large part of what we do as well, rather than just sort of older generation people. It's young people with you know, increased appetites and the budgets to match.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. I mean, that certainly ties in with what we've heard, where you've got the sort of older generation super yacht owner who's saying, my grandchildren don't want to come on my yacht anymore. They just think it's boring, and they don't want to be cruising around the Med or, you know, going to yet another party. They do want a meaningful experience where they're giving back and learning about conservation and having unique experiences of the type you've been talking about.
And indeed, yeah, I mean, we you know, some of the specific requests that we have, it's clients going, give me that carrot, you know, give me something which is sexy enough and fun enough that's going to entice my you know, my grown-up children or my grandchildren to, you know, come and join me. And again, these landmark trips that the people are doing, maybe they're not traditional, you know, people outside the traditional charter market, you know, you know, the thought of chartering a yacht just for a holiday was something that they'd never consider. But now it's like, you know what, this is an anniversary, this is a big birthday. You know, let's actually spend a lot of money on something meaningful and huge. And so you're opening up this world to a different market as well, beyond just the usual people who are, you know, chartering the Med and in the Caribbean.
Absolutely. Well, talking of destinations, we have had some questions here from Jean-Jacques Marie, I think, has asked about Indonesia and has said, is Indonesia still considered as a highly sought after destination, and which areas more specifically? So I don't know if that's an area that you get particularly involved in, Henry and Neal.
Yes. So you know, one place you know, obviously we have a you know, a huge globe out there, and I've traveled to an extensive part of it, not to everywhere. My exposure personally to Indonesia is Raja Ampat, having been there a couple of times, actually heading there in the next couple of months, subject to COVID, but that's all looking quite encouraging at the moment. Raja Ampat, again, it does have its challenges in terms of permitting, because in terms of chartering in, but for owners, that is something which is very attainable. And again, there are legitimate ways of going down there if conservation is central to what you're doing. And that's something which is very close to my heart. Again, it's known, as some of the most diverse waters on the planet. And it's somewhere that, and from an owner's point of view, we see more and more people wanting to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, obviously over the last 18 months, pretty much the whole world has been off limits on an on and off basis, depending on the sort of whims of different regulations and so on, and COVID restrictions. But I'm just wondering here, somebody's asking, this is Simon is saying inspiring presentation, sorry, thank you. And he's asking which countries you do not cover in Africa and the Carib countries. And I also wanted to roll into that question, Henry, about you mentioned there the Yemen earlier on, which I guess the Yemen itself is probably off limits, but I wondered if there are any other countries like that are off limits at the moment, but you see in the near future that they may become more sort of rehabilitated and they might kind of open up to super yacht visits potentially.
So Africa is sort of is a more challenging destination in some respects in terms of what yachts can do. A lot of the coastlines don't present themselves particularly well for yacht charters, and then also or for yacht visits. But also, it tends to be sort of a big dog leg out of the way of where you'd usually go. We have had serious interest, and this is during COVID actually, of going down the east coast of Africa, so Kenya, Tanzania, heading down to sort of Dar es Salaam, Mafia Island, which is famous for its whale sharks, and then on to Madagascar. There are people are mentioning and looking into things such as Eritrea, again, similar to a lot of these remote destinations. There is not an infrastructure, there's not a level of comfort or luxury there, so a yacht could work very well as using that sort of bubble of comfort, that consistency that your charterers or owners are used to, and then they can explore further inland. We have been discussing trips in West Africa, and again, it's quite often a moving field in terms of where it's accessible from both a safety and a permitting side of things. In terms of places further afield, in terms of where we would think about for yachts where it's currently inaccessible but may open up, I'm struggling to think actually. I mean, you have places like the Andaman Islands. I mean, that's part of the Indian subcontinent, so that's all locked down with COVID at the moment, and again, that's a permitting issue in terms of bringing charters in. Neal, I'm trying to think, is there anywhere which sort of fits that Socotra model? I mean, obviously the Yemen in itself, just to be clear, on the mainland, that really is inaccessible. But Socotra, because of its remoteness, because of it's an island, it does avoid the sort of the danger, the lack of security, I suppose, that you have on the mainland.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, actually, we have another question here, and it's from Jean-Jacques. And he is asking, he's saying, there is a race to the most outstanding explorer vessel with genuine scientific programs pegged to them. How important is the yacht vessel pedigree versus the actual destination? So that's an interesting question. Yeah.
It's a very good question. I think it goes without saying, the more capable a yacht, then the better it's served in that destination. And I think we're currently seeing a lot of new vessels either in the pipeline or coming out of the yards, which have better and better capabilities. There is not everyone has access to an Explorer yacht or an Explorer yacht in that relative destination. So sometimes you need to use a more typical type yacht, as long as it fits the criteria for what you need to operate in that area. But it goes without saying, the fact that now people are constructing or refitting, previous research vessels or cargo vessels or icebreakers into a super yacht sort of expedition explorer yacht capability, means that these types of projects become much easier to operate and to deliver. In the past, we have a lot of inquiries from people and we aren't able to deliver simply because there's not a vessel which is in the region, and owners aren't willing to do the long delivery, or the vice versa. The charters aren't prepared to pay the huge delivery costs to get an explorer yacht specifically. So sometimes you have to repurpose and make the best of what you have in that area. So any increased capability is music to our ears, and the more out there, it means the more for us and the other people who operate in this arena to be able to take clients to more remote and interesting places.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see as time goes on how the designs of super yachts are sort of affected also by concerns on sustainability and so on. That's one of the things that we're looking at the moment, is changing the design and the build and even the refit of super yachts to make them more suitable to different destinations, but also going back to that with a nod towards sustainability as well, and trying to sort of build that in.
And I think and on the sustainability side of things, yachts are very much in the public eye. I suppose it is the pinnacle of success. It's the pinnacle of capitalism. And so in order to sort of counter accusations from people that they are just sort of playthings for the wealthy, is that actually that genuine research is done on the back of them. And if these things are going to remote destinations, the uplift is getting it there. The uplift has been largely covered, and so be able to help use those yachts while either on an actual trip or on the shoulder sides of each trip to do genuine research, when researchers couldn't otherwise get access to these places, then I think then that's genuine difference that will counter an argument that these things are just there for frivolous uses.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, look, we're kind of coming towards the end here. I'm just wondering if anybody else out there has got any other questions. I have just one that's popped up into my head, and I'm sure you've probably got more than one answer to this, but I just wondered if you'd had any really sort of unusual requests from people, from your potential clients. It seems to me from what you said that most of the experiences that you're offering people are out of the ordinary anyway, but I would just wonder if there's anything sort of extraordinary that any potential client has asked from your trips.
I think with, sort of going back to what you're saying about sort of a new generation coming through, again, they're by definition of their age and the life experience that they've had, there's now so what we do, I suppose, we don't just describe ourselves just as sort of expedition planning or land-based or yacht-based trip. We're sort of part production, we're part events as well. And so when there is a gathering of friends in a location, then there's sometimes sort of sometimes an ask to have a sort of party of sorts, I suppose. And depending on where the location is, you need to obviously be sympathetic to where you are. But we've been known to do some rather unusual sort of last night affairs, sort of in some pretty off the beaten track places, which sort of, again, it sort of brings in another element of complexity. Doing a full scale party in somewhere which is very many thousands of miles away from the nearest bits of civilization. Yeah.
Now, actually, Henry, Neal has just pointed out to me that we've got some questions in the Q&A box. Forgive me, I hadn't seen those. So to go to these quickly, Gail Patterson is asking, other than the Solomon Islands, would any of these other aforementioned destinations work well for families with children?
So The dive destinations, which are more specifically dive destinations, that obviously proposes a challenge, for the children's side of things, which is where bringing in something like a submersible really does then bring that alive. And as I sort of touched on, there's one family in particular that we look after, and we actually manage their submersible for them. It's a 7-man submersible, and the whole point of that is that our principal, wants to show the world. He wants to show the underworld to his children who are too young. So in fact, we are planning a trip to Cocos with them, in the very near future. And that is not somewhere where kids traditionally would be taken, because as I said, you can go to the land, but you're relatively limited what you can do on the land. There's some trails, there's some hiking, you can visit a research station, but it's not somewhere where you can go and take a bucket and spade and go and make sandcastles. That is not not allowed. This is a protected marine sanctuary.
Sure.
So by bringing in a submersible, that allows them to go down and experience stuff that otherwise you'd have to sort of suit up and be, have many dives under your belt to be able to experience.
Sure.
And again, depending on the ages, we're quite vested, and it goes back to that sort of various hats we wear with the production and the events. We're well versed in sort of doing treasure hunts in terms of having staff who again wear lots of different hats and can entertain children. Tutors who bring the world around to life. We'll make workbooks for kids, which will reference what they've seen during the day, so they actually come away a little bit more educated. But that education process is interesting because it's pertinent to the things they've seen, during their day out under the water in a sub or hiking through a jungle.
Well, that sounds a lot more interesting than some of the kind of COVID type online learning that kids have had to do over the last few months. So this is a question, I think Neal wants to answer this one. Emma Thompson has said, is there a limit on how many trips can be organised to these remote areas each year? Is there a risk of these areas becoming somewhat overrun with yacht charters? So Neal, would you like to answer that one?
Yeah, sure. Of the destinations we've spoken about, the only destination that has a limit is Aldabra. They limit the total number of visitors each year. And so you need to apply to the local research station and the Seychelles environmental minister to get those permits. So that is the only one that has a limit on the number of visitors each year. The exact number, I don't know off the top of my head. And of course, there's always the risk of all these destinations getting overrun by yacht charters. As these places become more and more accessible, there is that risk. And if the cruise liners start coming in, then that definitely is a big risk. But as it stands at the moment, their remoteness and sort of inaccessibility is their saving grace at the moment. So they're all very well preserved. As I mentioned with Aldabra, there's been a lot of reform and environmental protection that's put in place, and the numbers are increasing. The same with South Georgia. The whale numbers there are increasing every single year as a result of the banning of whaling. So they are becoming more popular, but at the same time, they're becoming more protected and properly managed.
Excellent. Well, that's good to hear. And one other question here from Marcel Rico, and he is saying, hi, Henry, thank you for the nice pictures. How long in advance do you need to commit to some of these trips? How long do you stay in places typically? And what is the maximum amount of people that you typically take in such trips? So some kind of logistics questions there. I don't know if you want to answer that, Henry.
Depending on the destination, it's a permitting thing. So somewhere like the Antarctic, for instance, we normally recommend at least 3 months out. But again, the longer you have on these things, the easier it is to find a more suitable platform for them. People have a very different specific range of budgets, the amounts of people who are going to be on the trip, what capabilities they want. Do they need to have a helicopter capability? So, and sort of linking in with what the question that Neal just answered as well, yes, these places will become more visited, but relative to the more popular destinations out there, I think we're many, many years away before them becoming what I call crowded. We are a small company. We deal between 25 and 35 trips a year. So the volume of things that we are personally able to deliver is not going to materially affect these destinations. And I think, you know, even though we'd really want people to visit these malls, not just from you know, a business standpoint, but I think it's just, you know, these places do rely on the income that can bring in, especially with this conservation angle as well. Now going back to more this question here, you know, if I'm ever going to have a disagreement with a client, it tends to be for how long they want to go. Everyone is resource rich and they're time poor, and you know, you can spend weeks in some of these destinations and not even scratch the surface, and there is a, you know, a large financial uplift to get there just for day one. So once you're there, then it becomes more economical the longer you're down there. So that is always where we have a difference of opinions. And you know, there is a cutoff point when we start going, this is ridiculous, there's no point you going down there for that short amount of time, because you're exposed to things like weather windows and everything else. In terms of group size, you have your typical limitations on commercial yacht charters of 12 passengers. If you're an owner and it's a private voyage, then that depends on what the yacht is specified to. And there are a handful of yachts out there which have PYC, which enable you to take, you know, groups larger than 12. Or additionally, you can have you know, a fleet, and you can bring a mothership and a support ship. You know, one of the things which is quite often overlooked, and sometimes even in the build process of these more remote designed platforms, is, you know, the ability to house the staff, the experts, the conservationists, the media team, if that's something you need, on the same platform. It's all well and good filling up your vessel with 12 guests, and you have the usual complement of crew to be able to run it smoothly, but then you have no berths left to actually bring the thing alive. So that's normally the first question that we ask, you know, what level activities, what level of conservation, what level of media, so we can then, you know, find a platform that allows to do that all in one self-contained bubble, or do we need to bring in an additional platform, you know, at further cost? So you know, there's no sort of direct answer to that. Some trips we can turn around, you know, we've turned around trips with little sort of 5-6 days notice, places which don't need that level of permitting, but then other places there are just, you know, physical barriers, because, you know, you need to speak to governments, you need to speak to permitting authorities to make them go ahead.
Excellent. Okay. Well, look, I think that brings us nicely towards the end of our session here. I think we've addressed the questions that people have asked, and so unless you've got anything to add, Henry or Neal, I think we've probably come to the end of our time. But thank you very much for a really informative session, Henry Cookson and Neal Bateman, and thank you to our audience for tuning in. So we are recording this session, and please bear with us while we wait to edit the recording if we need to, and then get it all sent out to you. We will automatically send these recordings to you, but that will probably be sometime towards the end of next week. So as I say, thank you for your patience. If anybody out there has any suggestions or comments for this or future webinars, then please get in touch with us. If you've got any more queries about Cookson Adventures or the new remote super yacht destinations out there, then Henry and Neal are the people to get in touch with. So I think that's all from me, and until the next time, thank you very much indeed, and please stay tuned. And we'll catch up with you again soon. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Cheers, Lorna.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you, guys.
Take care. Bye-bye.